Jake had been living alone in his mountain cabin for 3 years now. After his divorce, he needed space to think and heal. The cabin sat on 20 acres of pine forest, miles away from the nearest neighbor. It was perfect for someone who made his living taking pictures of wild animals and nature. That Tuesday night started like any other. Jake was sitting at his computer, editing photos he had taken of elk earlier that week. The wind was howling outside, and snow was falling hard. Weather like this was normal for March in the Colorado mountains. He had gotten used to the sounds of the forest, branches creaking, wind whistling through the trees, and the occasional animal moving around outside. But around 11:30, he heard something different. A sound like thunder, but it lasted too long and seemed to come from right above his cabin. The whole building shook for a few seconds. Jake looked up from his computer screen and listened carefully. Maybe a big tree had fallen somewhere nearby. It happened sometimes during bad storms. He went back to his work, but 15 minutes later, he heard it again. This time it sounded like something heavy had hit the ground not far from his front door. Jake got up and looked out the window, but it was too dark and snowy to see anything clearly. He grabbed his flashlight and opened the door just enough to shine the light outside. The beam cut through the falling snow, but he could not see what had made the noise. Everything looked normal. His truck was still parked where he left it, and the trees around the cabin seemed fine. Jake closed the door and decided it was probably just another fallen branch, or maybe a rock that had rolled down from higher up the mountain. He made himself a cup of coffee and continued working on his photos. The storm was getting worse, and the wind was making the cabin creak more than usual. Jake was used to being alone during bad weather, but tonight felt different somehow. He could not shake the feeling that something was not right. At exactly midnight, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. 3 soft knocks on his front door. Not the random banging of wind-blown branches, but actual knocks. Someone was out there in the middle of a snowstorm, miles from anywhere. Jake froze. Who could possibly be at his door at this hour, in this weather? He lived so far from town that even the mail carrier only came once a week. His nearest neighbors were at least 5 miles away, and they were an elderly couple who would never venture out in conditions like this. The knocking came again, softer this time, like whoever was out there was getting weaker. Jake grabbed his hunting rifle from the wall rack, not because he wanted to hurt anyone, but because he had to be careful. Strange things happened in remote areas, and he had heard stories about people who got lost in the mountains and did desperate things to survive. He approached the door slowly and called out, "Who's there?" No answer came back, just the sound of wind and snow hitting the cabin walls. Jake waited for a full minute before asking again, louder this time. Still nothing. Against his better judgment, Jake unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, keeping the rifle ready. What he saw made him forget all about being careful. A woman was lying in the snow just outside his door, barely moving. She was wearing some kind of strange silver suit that seemed to shimmer even in the darkness. Jake quickly set the rifle aside and knelt down beside her. She was unconscious and felt incredibly cold, even colder than she should have been after lying in the snow. Her skin had an odd pale blue color, and her hair was silver white. Not gray like an old person's hair, but actually silver like metal. He had never seen anyone who looked like this woman. Her face was beautiful, but somehow different from any person he had ever met. Her features were sharper, more defined, and her closed eyes seemed larger than normal. The suit she wore looked like it was made of some kind of metal fabric that bent and moved like cloth but gleamed like polished steel. Jake checked for a pulse and found one, though it was very slow and weak. She was breathing, but just barely. He knew he had to get her inside immediately or she would freeze to death. He carefully lifted her up and was surprised by how light she felt, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's. Once inside, Jake laid her on the couch near his fireplace and threw several blankets over her. He built up the fire until it was roaring, filling the room with warmth and light. Under the better lighting, he could see that the woman's strange appearance was even more unusual than he had first thought. Her skin had a definite blue tint, like someone who was extremely cold, but it seemed natural rather than caused by the freezing weather. The silver suit she wore had no visible buttons, zippers, or seams. It looked like it had been poured onto her body and then hardened. Along the arms and chest of the suit, Jake could see faint symbols that seemed to glow with their own soft light. He tried to wake her up by gently shaking her shoulder and calling to her, but she remained unconscious. Jake had some basic first aid training from his days in the army, so he knew he needed to warm her up gradually. He brought hot water bottles from his bedroom and placed them around her body, being careful not to burn her with too much heat too fast. As he worked to help her, Jake could not stop wondering where she had come from. The nearest road was 3 miles away, and no one could have walked that far in this storm, especially not dressed in what looked like some kind of costume. Maybe she was from one of those survival reality shows, though he had never heard of any being filmed in this area. But the more he looked at her, the more he realized that nothing about this situation made sense. Her breathing was too slow and too deep, like she was built differently inside. Her skin stayed that pale blue color even as she warmed up, and those glowing symbols on her suit definitely were not from any clothing he had ever seen. Jake spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair beside the couch, keeping the fire going, and checking on the mysterious woman every few minutes. He dozed off once or twice, but kept waking up to make sure she was still breathing. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, everything was warm and quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the woman's slow, steady breathing. Before dawn, Jake remembered the loud crash he had heard earlier. He grabbed his flashlight and heavy coat and went outside to look around. The snow had stopped falling, and in the early morning light, he could see his own footprints from when he had found the woman at his door. But 50 yards behind the cabin, he found something that made his hands shake. There was a perfectly round crater in the snow, about 10 feet across and 3 feet deep. The edges of the crater were smooth, and the snow around it had melted and then refrozen into ice. Whatever had made this hole had been extremely hot when it hit the ground. At the bottom of the crater, Jake could see pieces of what looked like the same metallic material as the woman's suit. Some of the pieces were still warm to the touch, even hours after whatever had happened. Jake picked up one of the smaller fragments and examined it closely. It was lighter than aluminum but stronger than steel, and it had the same faint glow as the symbols on the woman's clothing. Jake stood at the edge of the crater, holding the strange metal fragment, and realized that his quiet life in the mountains had just changed forever. Whatever this woman was, wherever she had come from, she had literally fallen from the sky and landed at his doorstep. And now she was lying unconscious in his living room, depending on him to keep her alive. Jake barely slept that first night. Every few minutes, he would check on the mysterious woman to make sure she was still breathing. Her pulse stayed slow but steady, and gradually her skin began to feel less cold to the touch. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, and the storm outside finally began to calm down as morning approached. Around 10 in the morning, Jake was making coffee when he heard a soft sound from the living room. He rushed over and saw that the woman's eyes were open. They were the most unusual eyes he had ever seen, a pale silver color that seemed to catch and reflect the firelight like mirrors. She was looking around the room with what appeared to be confusion and wonder. When she saw Jake approaching, she tried to sit up but seemed dizzy and weak. She said something in a language that sounded like music mixed with whispers. The words flowed together in a way that was beautiful but completely unfamiliar. Jake had traveled to many countries for his photography work and had heard dozens of languages, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Jake held up his hands to show he meant no harm and spoke slowly. "Hey, It's okay. You're safe. I found you outside in the snow last night. You were unconscious and freezing cold. The woman tilted her head and listened carefully to his words, her silver eyes never leaving his face. She tried to speak again, this time making sounds that seemed like she was trying to copy the rhythm of English. It was fascinating to watch. Within just a few minutes, she began mixing her musical language with words that sounded almost like English. Her ability to learn was incredible, as if her mind was built to understand and adapt to new languages quickly. Cold, she said finally, her voice soft and melodic. I was cold. Her accent was unusual, but Jake could understand her clearly. She looked down at the blankets covering her, and then at the fire. Warm now. This is warm. Jake nodded and sat down in the chair across from her, being careful not to move too quickly or seem threatening. Yes, you were very cold when I found you. What's your name? How did you get here? The woman was quiet for a long moment, as if she was thinking about how to answer. She touched the glowing symbols on her silver suit and said, I am called Xena. I came from far away. Very far. She looked toward the window where bright sunlight was streaming in. Your sun. It gives much heat. My world. Our sun grows dim and cold. Jake felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. Your world? What do you mean? But even as he asked the question, he was beginning to understand. The crater outside, the strange metallic suit, her unusual appearance, it all pointed to something that seemed impossible, but was sitting right in front of him. Xena seemed to sense his confusion. She pointed to herself and then gestured upward. I travel between stars. My people, we are dying because our sun loses its power. Everything becomes cold, too cold for life. I was sent to study your world, to learn about heat and warmth. Jake stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. An hour ago, the strangest thing in his life was deciding which photos to edit. Now he was apparently talking to someone from another planet who had crashed in his backyard. It should have been terrifying or unbelievable, but somehow, looking into her silver eyes, he found himself accepting what she said. You're telling me you're from another planet? Jake asked. Xena nodded seriously. And you crashed here by accident? Not accident, Xena replied. My ship was damaged when I entered your atmosphere. The heat from your air, it was more intense than I expected. My cooling systems failed and I could not control the landing. She looked around the cabin again. But this place, it saved my life. The warmth from your fire, it brought me back. Jake got up and poured her a cup of coffee, making sure it was not too hot. When he handed it to her, Xena stared at the steaming mug as if it was the most amazing thing she had ever seen. She held it close to her face and closed her eyes, breathing in the warm air rising from the liquid. This is wonderful, she whispered. On my world, we have nothing like this. Everything is cold, always cold. Our food, our air, even our bodies. We know only cold. She took a tiny sip and her eyes widened with surprise. It warms me inside. How is this possible? Jake found himself smiling despite the strangeness of the situation. It's just coffee. We drink it to warm up and to help us stay awake. Here, try this too. He brought her a piece of toast that was still warm from the toaster. When Xena bit into it, she looked amazed. Your food has heat built into it, she said with wonder. On my world, all food is cold. We eat it cold. We sleep in cold. We live in cold. But you create warmth everywhere. In your drinks, in your food, in your home. She gestured around the cabin. How do you make so much heat? Jake spent the next few hours showing Xena simple things that he had never thought about before. He demonstrated how the stove worked, how electric heaters could warm a room, and how blankets trapped body heat. Each new thing fascinated her completely. She was especially amazed by his body temperature. "You are warm inside," she said, holding her hand near his arm without actually touching him. "I can feel heat coming from your skin. My people, we are cold inside and outside. Our bodies do not make heat like yours do." As the day went on, Xena began to understand more English words and could explain more about her situation. She told Jake that her people lived on a planet where the average temperature was far below freezing. They had technology that could provide some heat, but it required enormous amounts of energy, and their resources were running out as their sun grew weaker. "My leaders sent me here to study your heat sources," Xena explained. "They want to know how your people stay warm, how your planet creates so much heat. If we can learn your methods, maybe we can save our world." Jake felt honored to be chosen to help, even though it was just by accident that Xena had ended up at his cabin. He began teaching her about different types of heat: fire, electricity, solar power, and geothermal energy. But what seemed to fascinate her most was the idea that humans could create warmth just by being near each other. "When you sit close to me," Xena observed, "I feel warmer. Not just from your body heat, but something else. Something I do not understand." She looked puzzled. "It is like warmth that does not come from fire or machines." Jake realized she was talking about the emotional warmth of human companionship, but he was not sure how to explain that concept to someone from a world where apparently such feelings did not exist. As the sun began to set on their first full day together, Jake found himself looking forward to learning more about Xena's world and sharing more about his own. He set up a comfortable sleeping area for her near the fireplace and made sure she had plenty of blankets. As she settled down for the night, Xena looked at him with those remarkable silver eyes and said, "Thank you, Jake. On my world, we do not have a word for what you have given me today, but I think your people call it kindness." Jake smiled and added another log to the fire. "You're welcome, Xena. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." As he watched her fall asleep, Jake realized that his quiet mountain life was about to become the most extraordinary adventure he had ever experienced. Over the next few days, Jake's cabin became like a classroom, where he was the teacher and Xena was the most eager student he had ever met. Every morning, she would wake up fascinated by something new about human warmth. Jake found himself seeing his own world through completely different eyes as he tried to explain things that seemed obvious to him but were miraculous to her. On the third morning, Jake was cooking bacon and eggs when Xena appeared beside him, watching the sizzling pan. With intense curiosity, "The food makes its own heat while you prepare it," she observed. "This is another kind of warmth I do not understand." Jake flipped the bacon and smiled. "Yeah, cooking food makes it taste better and kills any harmful things that might be in it. Plus, hot food just feels good to eat, especially when it's cold outside." He handed her a piece of crispy bacon that was still warm from the pan. Xena bit into it and closed her eyes with a look of pure joy. "On my world, we consume nutrition tablets that provide what our bodies need, but they have no heat, no flavor. This is like eating sunshine." She paused and looked thoughtful. "Jake, why do your people create so many different ways to make warmth? Is it just for survival?" The question made Jake think harder than he had in years. "Well, I guess we do need heat to survive, but it's more than that. Warmth makes us feel good, feel comfortable. It makes life more enjoyable." He served her a plate of hot eggs and toast. "When we're warm, we're happier." This concept seemed to puzzle Xena greatly. She spent several minutes eating her warm breakfast in silence, clearly thinking deeply about what Jake had said. Finally, she spoke. "Happiness. This is connected to warmth somehow. I am beginning to understand." Later that day, Jake decided to show Xena his workshop where he developed and printed his photographs. The small room had a space heater that kept it cozy while he worked. As they entered the warm space, Xena immediately relaxed in a way Jake had not seen before. "This room feels different," she said, looking around at the photos hanging on lines, to dry. "The warmth here is gentle, constant. It makes me feel—" She searched for the right word. "Safe." Jake was amazed by how quickly she was learning to identify different types of warmth and their effects. He showed her his favorite photographs, pictures of animals in their natural habitats, landscapes covered in snow, families of deer gathered together. Xena studied each image carefully. "These creatures," she said, pointing to a photo of wolves huddled together during a snowstorm. "They create warmth by staying close to each other. This is not fire or machines. This is warmth from togetherness." Jake nodded. "Exactly. Animals and people both do that. When we're close to others we care about, we feel warmer inside, even if the temperature doesn't change." He pulled out a photo of a family camping around a fire. "See how they're all gathered around the fire but also close to each other? They're sharing two kinds of warmth." Xena stared at the photo for a long time. "Two kinds of warmth," she repeated softly. "Physical warmth from the fire, and something else from being together. On my world, we do not gather like this. We exist separately, alone. Each person survives on their own." This revelation made Jake feel sad for her. He could not imagine living in a world without companionship, without the warmth that came from friendships and family relationships. "That sounds lonely," he said gently. "Lonely," Xena repeated the word as if tasting it. "I did not know this feeling had a name. Yes, I think my people are lonely, but we have never understood what we were missing." She looked at Jake with those silver eyes that seemed to see everything. "Since being here with you, I feel something different, less alone. Is this what you call friendship?" Jake felt his heart warm at her words. Despite the impossible circumstances, he had grown genuinely fond of Xena. Her curiosity and innocence made him see the beauty in simple things he had taken for granted. "Yes, that's friendship. It's one of the most important kinds of warmth humans have." That evening, they sat together by the fireplace, and Xena asked Jake to tell her about his life. He found himself sharing stories he had not talked about in years: his childhood, his failed marriage, his decision to live alone in the mountains. Xena listened to everything with complete attention. "You came here because you were hurt," she said when he finished. "Like me, you were looking for a place to heal. This cabin, it has been a healing place for both of us." Jake realized she was right. For the first time in years, he did not feel the heavy sadness that had driven him to isolate himself. Helping Xena and seeing the world through her eyes had reminded him of the joy that came from connecting with others. "Tell me about your world," Jake said. "What is it like where you come from?" Xena's expression became distant and sad. "My planet is beautiful in its own way, but it is a cold beauty. We have cities made of ice and metal, mountains that sparkle like crystals in the dim light of our dying sun. But there is no laughter, no gathering together for warmth. Each person lives in their own space, focuses only on their own survival." She gestured to the crackling fire between them. "We have technology that can create heat, but it requires great energy and rare materials. As our sun grows weaker, these resources become harder to find. My people sent me here to learn how humans create so much warmth with such simple methods." Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks floating up the chimney. "Fire is pretty simple when you know how to make it. All you need is fuel, air, and a spark to get it started." He looked at Xena. "But the warmth between people, that's harder to explain. It's not something you can build or buy. It just happens when people care about each other." Over the following days, Jake continued teaching Xena about different heat sources, but their conversations kept returning to the concept of emotional warmth. She was fascinated by the idea that humans could make each other feel better just by being kind, by listening, by sharing experiences. "When you smile at me," Xena said one afternoon as they walked around the property, "I feel warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. When you show patience as I learn new words, when you share your food and your knowledge, this creates warmth inside me that I have never experienced." Jake watched her bend down to touch a patch of snow that was melting in the afternoon sun. Even after several days, she was still amazed by the simple fact that the sun could melt ice. "You're learning about compassion," he told her. "That's what creates the warmth you're feeling." Xena stood up and brushed snow from her silver suit. The strange symbols on her clothing had been glowing more brightly each day, and Jake wondered if that meant something important. "Compassion," she repeated. "This might be the most important thing I learn on your world. My people will need to understand this if they are going to survive." That night, as they prepared for sleep, Xena made an announcement that surprised Jake. "Tomorrow, I must try to contact my ship. It is damaged, but perhaps I can repair the communication system. My people will be expecting a report about what I have learned." Jake felt a sudden sadness at the thought of Xena leaving, though he knew this day would come eventually. "What will you tell them?" he asked. Xena looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I will tell them that humans have discovered something more valuable than any technology. I will tell them about warmth that comes not from machines, but from the heart. And I will tell them that perhaps the answer to saving our world is not just learning to create heat, but learning to create connection." As Jake fell asleep that night, he wondered what would happen when Xena's people learned about the warmth of human friendship and compassion. Would they understand it? Would they be able to create it on their own world? And most importantly, would Xena have to leave forever once she made contact with them? The next morning, Xena asked Jake to help her find the remains of her ship. They walked through the snow to the crater behind his cabin, and Jake watched as she knelt beside the scattered metallic pieces. Her silver suit began glowing brighter. As she touched different fragments, almost like the pieces were recognizing her. "This piece here is part of the communication system," she explained, holding up a twisted chunk of metal that looked no different from any other piece to Jake. "And this one controlled the ship's navigation." Her fingers moved over the surfaces of the fragments with practiced skill, as if she could read information just by touching them. Jake was amazed as Xena began arranging the pieces in a specific pattern on the ground. Some of the fragments started glowing and connecting to each other with thin beams of light. Within an hour, she had assembled what looked like a complex piece of technology from what had seemed like random scrap metal. "It is damaged, but it might work long enough to send one message," Xena said, her voice filled with uncertainty. She looked at Jake with an expression he had never seen before. She seemed nervous, almost afraid. "Jake, before I contact my people, there is something I must tell you, something I should have explained from the beginning." The serious tone in her voice made Jake's stomach tighten with worry. Over the past week, he had grown to trust Xena completely. The thought that she might have been hiding something important from him was troubling. "What is it?" he asked, sitting down on a fallen log near where she was working. Xena continued adjusting the alien device while she spoke, not meeting his eyes. "When my leaders sent me to your world, they did not just want me to study your heat sources. They wanted me to find the best locations and methods for bringing humans back to our planet." Jake felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. "Bringing humans back? What do you mean?" "My people are dying, Jake. Our sun grows weaker every day, and we do not have enough energy to keep our cities warm much longer. The plan was for me to identify which humans would be most useful. Those who understand how to create fire, how to build heating systems, how to survive in cold conditions." Xena's voice became quieter. The idea was to relocate selected humans to our world to help us develop better heating technology. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. You mean kidnap people? Take them away from their families, their homes? Xena finally looked at him, and he could see pain in her silver eyes. I know how it sounds, but my people are desperate. We thought it was the only way to save our civilization. We believed that a few humans could help us learn what we needed to survive, and then we would return them safely to Earth. Jake stood up and walked a few steps away, trying to process what she had told him. So when you crashed here, when I helped you, was I just a test subject to you? Were you studying me to see if I would be useful? At first, yes, Xena admitted, and her honesty hurt more than any lie could have. I was supposed to observe you, learn about your survival skills, assess whether you would be a good candidate for relocation. But Jake, she stood up and moved closer to him. Everything changed after the first day. Once I experienced your kindness, your patience, the way you cared for a complete stranger, I began to understand something my people have never known. Jake turned to face her. Despite feeling betrayed, he could see that Xena was genuinely distressed about the situation. What did you understand? I understood that taking humans away from their world would not just be wrong, it would be pointless. What my people really need cannot be stolen or learned from prisoners. It cannot be built with technology or powered by machines. Xena gestured between them. What we need is what you showed me. The warmth that comes from choosing to help others. From building connections, from caring about someone else's well-being. Jake felt some of his anger fading as he listened to her explanation. You're talking about compassion again. About friendship. Yes, but more than that. I am talking about hope, about joy, about the feeling that comes from working together instead of just surviving alone. These things create a warmth that no fire or machine can match. Xena looked at the partially repaired communication device. My people sent me here to steal your heat, but what I discovered is that real warmth cannot be taken. It can only be given freely. Jake sat back down on the log, his mind racing. So what are you going to tell them? Your people are still dying, right? They're still waiting for you to help them. Xena nodded sadly. They are dying, and they are waiting. But I cannot tell them to come here and take humans against their will. I have seen what that would do. It would destroy the very thing that makes the warmth possible in the first place. Then what's the solution? Jake asked. There has to be some way to help your people without hurting mine. Xena's eyes lit up, with sudden hope. There might be. What if instead of taking humans to our world, we learned to bring human warmth to our people? What if we could teach my civilization about compassion, about working together, about caring for each other? Jake thought about this idea. You mean change your entire culture? That sounds almost impossible. Perhaps, Xena agreed. But the alternative is letting my people die slowly in the cold, or becoming kidnappers and destroying the trust between our worlds forever. She knelt beside the communication device and began making final adjustments. I have made my choice, Jake. I am going to contact my leaders and tell them that I have found something better than what they sent me to find. Jake watched as the device began humming with energy. Symbols similar to those on Xena's suit appeared in the air above it, glowing softly in the afternoon sunlight. What exactly are you going to tell them? I am going to tell them the truth. That humans have learned to create warmth not just with fire and machines, but with their hearts. That the secret to survival is not taking what you need from others, but learning to give what you can. Xena paused and looked at Jake with determination. And I am going to tell them that if they want to save our world, they need to learn about love. The word love hung in the air between them. Jake realized that over the past week, that was exactly what had happened. He had come to love Xena like the sister he had never had, and she had learned to love him like family. It was that love that had taught her about real warmth. "Will they listen to you?" Jake asked. "I do not know," Xena admitted. "My people have never experienced love or friendship. They may not understand what I am trying to tell them. They may decide that I have been corrupted by human emotions and send someone else to complete the original mission." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "And if they do that?" Xena stood up and placed her hand on his shoulder. The gesture was something she had learned from watching him, a human way of showing care and support. "Then I will have to find a way to protect both our worlds. I will have to convince them that cooperation is better than conquest, that friendship is stronger than force." As the communication device powered up fully, Jake realized that everything was about to change. The peaceful week they had spent together learning about warmth and friendship might be coming to an end. But he also knew that Xena had been transformed by her time on Earth, and that transformation might be the key to saving both their peoples. "I'm proud of you," Jake said quietly. "It takes courage to stand up against your own people when you know they're wrong." Xena smiled, and Jake could see that she had learned not just about human warmth, but about human strength as well. "You taught me that real warmth comes from doing what is right, even when it is difficult. Now I must try to teach that lesson to an entire civilization." The device began projecting images and symbols into the air, indicating that contact with her homeworld was about to begin. Jake stepped back to give Xena space, but she gestured for him to stay close. "Whatever happens," she said, "I want my people to see the human who taught me about warmth. I want them to understand that our survival depends not on taking from Earth, but on learning from it." The communication device projected a shimmering image into the air above them. Jake found himself looking at what appeared to be a council of beings who looked similar to Xena, but their expressions were cold and stern. They wore darker versions of her metallic suit, and their silver eyes showed no warmth at all. When they spoke, their voices had the same musical quality as Xena's, but there was no joy in the sound. The conversation between Xena and her leaders lasted for nearly an hour, all in their flowing alien language. Jake could not understand the words, but he could read the emotion in their voices and gestures. The council members seemed angry and impatient, while Xena remained calm but determined. Several times, she gestured toward Jake, and he could tell she was trying to explain something important about him and about humans in general. Finally, Xena switched to English so Jake could understand what was happening. "Council Leader Vex, I want you to meet Jake, the human who saved my life and taught me about warmth." She looked at Jake encouragingly. "Jake, please tell them what you told me about why humans help each other." Jake felt nervous talking to alien beings from another world, but he could see how important this was to Xena. He stepped closer to the device and spoke clearly. "We help each other because it's the right thing to do. When someone is in trouble, we don't think about what we might get in return. We help because we care, because we're all connected somehow." The lead council member, Vex, listened to Xena's translation and then responded in their language. Xena's expression grew troubled as she translated back to Jake. "He says that caring for strangers is a weakness that humans cannot afford. He believes that survival requires putting your own people first, always." Jake shook his head. "That's where he's wrong. Humans are strongest when we work together, when we help each other. The warmth we create by caring doesn't make us weak. It makes us stronger." He thought about his own life, how isolation had made him sad and bitter, while helping Xena had brought him back to life. "When I was alone, I was surviving, but I wasn't really living. Connecting with others, caring about them, that's what makes life worth living." For the next several minutes, Xena continued translating between Jake and the council. Jake shared stories about human communities working together during disasters, about families taking care of each other, about strangers helping strangers just because it was right. With each story, he could see some of the council members becoming more thoughtful, though others remained skeptical. Then Vex made a statement that caused Xena to argue back passionately. Jake waited for the translation, and when it came, he felt his heart sink. He says they appreciate the information I have gathered, but they still need humans to come to our world to teach us these heating technologies. He says they will send ships to collect volunteers, and if not enough people volunteer, they will take what they need by force. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. After everything you've told them, they still want to kidnap people? Don't they understand that forcing someone to help destroys the very thing that makes the help valuable? Before Xena could translate, something unexpected happened. She stood up straight and began speaking to the council in a strong, clear voice. Even though Jake could not understand her words, he could hear the power and conviction in her speech. She talked for several minutes without stopping, her silver eyes flashing with determination. When she finished, there was complete silence from the council. Then Vex spoke in a voice that sounded different than before, uncertain, almost confused. Xena smiled as she translated his words. He asks how they could possibly learn about this human warmth when they have never experienced it themselves. He says it sounds like something that cannot be taught, only felt. That's exactly right, Jake said, feeling hope for the first time since the conversation began. You can't force someone to care about you. You can't steal compassion or kidnap kindness. Those things only grow when people choose to give them freely. Xena nodded and then made a proposal to the council that surprised Jake completely. She spoke in their language for a long time, occasionally gesturing toward Jake and toward the cabin. When she finished, the council members began talking among themselves in excited voices. "What did you tell them?" Jake asked. Xena's face was glowing with hope and determination. "I told them I have a different plan. Instead of bringing humans to our world by force, I proposed that we invite a small group of humans to visit us willingly. People who would come as teachers and friends, not as prisoners." Jake felt his heart race. "You mean like an exchange program?" "Exactly. Volunteers from Earth would come to our world and show us how to create warmth. Not just physical heat, but emotional warmth. They would teach us about friendship, about working together, about caring for each other. In return, we would share our technology with Earth, especially our knowledge about energy conservation and survival in harsh conditions." The council was still debating among themselves, but Jake could see that several members seemed interested in this new idea. Vex finally spoke again, and Xena translated with growing excitement. "He says this plan might work, but they want to know if any humans would actually volunteer for such a mission. Traveling to another world would be dangerous, and there would be no guarantee of safety." Jake thought about this question seriously. It would be incredibly risky to travel to an alien world, especially one that was dying from cold. But he also thought about the amazing week he had spent with Xena, learning about her world and teaching her about his. The cultural exchange had been the most rewarding experience of his life. "I would go," Jake said suddenly, surprising himself with the words. "I would volunteer to come to your world and help teach your people about human warmth." Xena stared at him in shock. "Jake, you cannot mean that. You would be leaving everything you know, everyone you care about." Jake looked around at his cabin, at the mountains he had called home for 3 years. "I came here because I was running away from the world, hiding from other people because I was hurt and angry. But this past week with you has reminded me of something I had forgotten, that life is better when you're helping others, when you're making a difference." He turned back to the communication device. "Tell your council that I volunteer to be the first human ambassador to your world. I'll come and teach your people everything I know about creating warmth, about building communities, about caring for each other." Xena translated his offer, and the reaction from the council was immediate and dramatic. They began talking all at once, their cold expressions replaced by something that looked almost like excitement. After several minutes of discussion, Vex spoke directly to Jake, and for the first time his voice carried a hint of warmth. "He says," Xena translated with tears in her silver eyes, "that if one human is willing to risk everything to help strangers from another world, then perhaps there is something to learn about this warmth you speak of. He says they will try your plan." Over the next hour, they worked out the details of the exchange program. Jake would travel to Xena's world along with a few other volunteers, scientists, teachers, and engineers who could help her people develop better technology while also learning about human compassion and cooperation. In return, Xena and a small group of her people would stay on Earth to continue learning about human culture and to serve as ambassadors between the two worlds. As the communication session ended, Jake felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the journey ahead. He would be leaving Earth, possibly forever, to help save a dying civilization. It was terrifying, but it was also the most meaningful thing he had ever had the chance to do. "Are you sure about this?" Xena asked as the device powered down. "You could have a safe, comfortable life here on Earth. What I am asking you to do is incredibly dangerous." Jake smiled and put his hand on her shoulder, the same gesture of friendship and support that she had learned from him. "A week ago, I was just surviving, living alone and avoiding the world. Now I have a chance to help save an entire civilization and maybe learn more about myself in the process. That's not dangerous. That's the adventure of a lifetime." Xena returned his smile, and Jake could see that she had learned something new about human warmth. The courage to take risks for others, the willingness to step into the unknown when it meant helping someone in need. "Besides," Jake added with a grin, "someone needs to make sure you don't forget everything I taught you about friendship and kindness. And someone needs to teach your people how to make coffee and bacon." Xena laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the snowy mountains. "Jake, I think you are going to fit in perfectly on my world. We have so much to learn from each other." As they walked back to the cabin together, Jake realized that this was what real warmth felt like. Not just the heat from a fire or the comfort of a warm bed, but the deep satisfaction that came from knowing you were making a difference in someone else's life. And soon, he would have the chance to share that warmth with an entire world of people who had never experienced it before.